Thanks, Preksha, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're dialing in. It's a pleasure to have you, Dr. Reiner.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Virtusa, Sweden.
Yeah.
And hope that we are able to engage the audience in the next 45 to 60 odd minutes in what we're going to exchange, what's happening in the industry, what are the typical hotspots, and what should CXOs like yourselves do to mitigate some of the challenges than some of the latest headwinds that telco is facing. So I'll start with the industry focal points as we speak. There are lots of headwinds happening in the telco industry as we speak. 5G is not getting monetized as soon as it was rolled out with a lot of optimism in 2019-20. Of course, the COVID helped in terms of splurging some of the bandwidth, etc. But somewhere down the line, I believe that it came into a deadlock situation post 2022-23. So what would you think led to that in terms of challenges, and what would be the typical market dynamics in your opinion, which is still proving it to be a challenging proposition for CXOs in terms of monetization?
Right. So first of all, thanks for having me here. It's really a great pleasure. Amazing to have you all join this webinar. Thank you for the nice introduction. That's very kind, all what you said. So I hope we can do some justice to your time that you spent here. So on your question, which is excellent, I believe the industry is vastly undervalued. And I believe there is, and you guys probably are helping there is ample opportunity to unlock the value that is hidden in the industry. Why is that so, right? Why is the value not really coming out? We have seen, as you said, significant investments going into the various generations of mobile communication. I was just looking up, it's basically every 10 years we see a new generation coming in. It was 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020 with the 4G, with the 5G, and 2030 we are expecting even then 6G. So it's basically every 10 years a huge investment cycle more or less coming in, extremely expensive. And as you said, the question has always been, is there a monetization of that particular technology other than just having more capacity and being more efficient, which definitely is the case. On the other side also what we see is there's the fixed connectivity business as well. And as we all know, there's a huge legacy still in many operators, which is even based on copper. And so we see a massive decline of the copper-based revenues, obviously, going to zero, while still there's cost associated with it. So as long as we are holding on to this legacy, there's another headwind. While, of course, on the other side, rolling out a fixed and fiber infrastructure is quite expensive. And in times where money wasn't as cheap as it used to be, it was extra difficult to finance and to continue that path. So now I think we're looking forward. What we see, I think, is a bit different in the various parts of the different regions that we are operating as industry. And of course, there's mobile and there's integrated, there's the incumbent, there's the attacker. So there's slightly different market archetypes, player archetypes. But we can largely see that the 5G rollout certainly nears completion in the more mature markets. While we see the focus there shifting really on using better monetization and using better efficiency tools, such as obviously AI, and that is just starting. And again, here is a huge opportunity for everyone to engage and to help unlock value by practically applying AI, whether it's in a network, whether it's at the IT, whether it's on the customer-facing side. There's ample opportunity, and we've just started, I would say. And of course, the big other trend that we see, especially in Europe, but also in other regions, is a need for consolidation. We have, especially in Europe, based on also regulations, a very fragmented landscape of players, subscale, unbearably small to really utilize the assets that are being required for providing telecommunication services. If you have an underutilized mobile network, it just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So we have seen good signs of some consolidation, like in Spain, MásMóvil and Orange, like in Italy with the Vodafone sell-off, like in UK, hopefully we will see some consolidation. So I think there's good signs between different carriers to consolidate in market and potentially even across market. And we also see an uptick specifically now in 2024 on the private equity side, where the issue has been a little bit, the expensive money has dampened a bit the transactions, but now we see private equity based deals coming up quite again. And that will help to unlock value as well, because it's a scale game at the end of the day.
Yeah. So great perspectives, Runner. I think what you're asking us to do really is to look forward, and there is immense potential. And as telco professionals, we need to be optimistic, and I don't think we should give up hope that early. You touched upon quite a few interesting perspectives, so let me just dig a little bit deeper into those. For example, when I look at the markets in the US versus the markets in Europe, versus Asia Pac and even the Middle East, we are a global company and we do engage with global clients. What we have seen is Europe somehow has been lying behind the 5G game. Is it particularly because of regulation? The reason why I ask is, for the first time in MWC, when I heard 4 CEOs of different operators, starting with Deutsche Telekom, Orange, Vodafone and Telefonica on the stage, each of those CEOs were complaining about European regulation pulling the European market down. To be honest, when I look at Scandinavia as a market where, for example, in Telia, where you have been actively involved in a lot of transformation, I do believe that Telia is ahead of a lot of other players in the game. However, somehow, yet trying to do the catch up because perhaps of regulation and the market fragmentation that you spoke about. So if you just want to shed some light on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say generally that Europe is behind on 5G, but certainly there's at least, 2 factors that come into mind looking at the rollout. One is, if I'm early on 4G, and I don't see the return on the investments enough, then I would obviously have not so much incentive to jump onto the 5G, very practically speaking. While, of course, the 5G, even if I don't directly monetize, will help me if I have capacity constraints. So when we now see the coverage layer on 7, 8, 900, when we see the 21, 23, but especially when we see the 3.5, that is the good capacity layer, which then obviously makes a lot of sense to complement, and that's how people have also started. So I think there's a pure ROI and business case driven decision when and how do I invest into the next generation. The other one is very practically speaking related to whether I have the license available. And in all our markets, obviously the license is the precondition for playing in 5G. And if you talk about Sweden, we had the unfortunate situation in Sweden here that the license for 5G came very late. So you could do nothing because without a license, you can only play around and do some POCs, but you can't really go at scale and do certainly not a commercial rollout. So now that is solved since quite a while. We have started, of course, as soon as the license was awarded, we got a very nice spectrum across all our footprint in Telia. And we have basically, we are by far the leader in the 5G, and this works out very well. So I wouldn't say generally Europe is behind, but there are issues regarding the ROI, and there are issues certainly regarding the availability of the license.
Right. Interesting. So telcos have recently caught up to a buzzword. They don't want to call themselves telcos because they don't believe to be the carriers any longer. You mentioned about monetization during the introduction. I think monetization game really is multifold in strategy when it comes to over-the-top services. And I think in order to monetize 5G, the game is how do you speed up OTT kind of services by utilizing both capacity of the network right across access, transport, and core, and maximize it. And of course, with 5G non-standalone to standalone, this is going to go all out. I'm sure operators are going to go all out, right? So with regards to that strategy, do you think that there is a inherent pull, or let's say a hindrance, because telcos, typically tier ones across geographies, have this culture of being the legacy behemoths of that market per se, where the cultural DNA is not really wired up to be a techco? Do you see that as a challenge?
These are multiple, I think, aspects you're touching upon. I think one thing, at least as far as I'm concerned, should be very clear. There needs to be focus. I can't expect everyone doing everything.
Right.
And as it comes to the connectivity providers, we need to make sure that we provide ubiquitous, safe, reliable, and affordable connectivity. That is really our mission. And that can be applied to pretty much any telco, I would say. I think there is a risk to fragment into areas which are just not the home turf. We have seen experiments where people started to do media, TV, where people start to do all sorts of adjacencies. Very few of them really successful, to be honest. So I think there needs to be focus. And the focus needs to be close to the core, close to connectivity services, and especially on the B2B, there is a huge opportunity for telcos to grow. Absolutely. I very much believe in the B2B because here we see things like a secure connectivity with a data center, with the SD-WAN, with the security services on top. And then, of course, 5G enterprise networks and the solutions. That's a huge opportunity to grow and to unlock efficiency on the enterprise side, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's transportation, whether it's any of the segments that we are serving. So I think it's really important not to believe that the growth that is happening everywhere can be, captured by everyone. I think everyone has a certain sweet spot. But it is true. I do agree that the growth that we see in the tech industry, especially obviously the hyperscalers, and especially now somewhat the hype on the AI side and the valuations that we see in the market are all based on a secure digital infrastructure, which is provided by the telcos.
Right.
And the telcos do not get a fair share of that. That is also true.
Correct. So you're saying that in order to be competitive enough in the market, we should complement the game, what hyperscalers are playing, and yet not allowing them to run away with the fair share of the revenue pie, correct? If I understand well. So, and focus on the strengths. Each market is different, each telco is different. Now that comes to the next question. You have been instrumental in tier one legacy telco transformations, and you have also worked in an next-gen operator like Jio, for example, in Reliance. I think you were instrumental in driving the strategy, and a lot of the credit goes to you, the way you relate the foundation principles that Jio had at its initial inception years. So what difference do you think you see when you look at Rakuten and Jios of the world versus, the behemoths like a Vodafone or an AT&T, right? And, how do these behemoths really counter to be more competitive and to be more challenging to, let's say, the hyperscalers, or perhaps not allow the hyperscalers to take away the larger revenue pie?
Yeah, so you're right. I had the privilege of being able to work in vastly different environments.
Right.
Deutsche Telekom, and then in India, Reliance Jio, Axiata in Southeast Asia, and now in the Nordics, Telia Company, very, very advanced here. I mean, this is very interesting because it allows me to draw some insights and conclusions. So I think if I look at from a big picture perspective, the start of a new business, you could think is easier because it allows to go from first principles and it allows to tap into the best of breed technology, process, and people. So fundamentally, you would think that's easier as compared to if you have a telecommunication company that has 168 years, I think now, like Telia Company on its back, which is a huge pride that we carry, but also there is, of course, a certain legacy that is carried along, and to transform such a company. So it sounds very different. But I do, on the other side, think that the principles to be successful are not so dissimilar.
Okay.
There are a few, I think, principles that we should maybe learn from. So So there is, and it's not a holistic probably list that I'm looking at, and we should discuss a bit more. But I think there is an element of experimentation and fast learning. We need to be better in experimenting and learning fast and improving fast, rather than having cycles that we have been used to in the industry of half a year and 1 year and even multiple years. These times require faster adaptation, whether it's driven by customer demand, whether it's driven by competition, or even driven by regulation. And certainly in Reliance Jio, this was very much the case. I mean, this was very, very agile environment. To an extent, you could almost call it sometimes chaotic, where maybe I, as a German, was helpful to do some sense of structure. But the combination was really, really good, because we had a vast amount of uncertainty also at the time in India. We had, I think, 11, 12 telecommunication players when we started. Absolutely. How would you believe that you can be successful? So I think that agility and the learning mindset is an important part. The other part is also to look at the future. I mean, we need to make sure that we are not building for the past. Too much I see investment, too much I see attention still going backwards.
Right.
And of course, it's easier said than done, because you are, of course, getting benefits from being backward compatible in IT speak. But it is also coming at a price. It drags you down. So I think the other part, which certainly we learned in Reliance, we were forward-looking. Mm-hmm. We looked at the 4G launch at the time without a circuit switch fallback, to be very precise, right? Yeah. It could have been easier to be backward compatible, because then you have a larger addressable base. But no, we decided to go without the fallback. We decided to go without the national roaming. And there's a certain set of decisions where we were always looking at what is the next thing that will be scaling rather than building for the past. So that's another thing. Another element certainly that is critically important is people. Mm-hmm. Right? If you look at who drives the transformation, it is not technology only, it is really the people applying technology. That's also what I'm really excited about. For me, the most exciting part in my work is to see how I get people embrace technology for change. Correct. Embrace technology for value creation. So that's another element where, again, in all the companies I've been at, whether it's the Greenfield like Reliance, or whether it's a Brownfield transformation, like in some of the other companies, it's all about getting the right people on the job. Not everyone is capable of changing dramatically, right? So it's not an easy thing to do, and it requires a mindset shift. It requires also hard training. And again, it requires also openness for failure, but fast learning and not repeating the failure twice. So those are some elements. I summarized it, and we discussed it in our pre-discussion. I summarize it in 5 Ps. This is my kind of little memory to remember. I think we need to be transforming around 5 Ps, which is we need to transform the products, the processes, the underlying platforms, our people, and our partners, and with our partners as telcos. And how to transform and how to really create a value out of those 5 pieces through standardization, simplification, and scaling, right? So these are
3 S's.
What I sometimes call 3S and 5 Ps, is standardize, simplify, and scale across the 5 Ps. That's a little bit, I think, the common thread. So to your earlier question, it's not so much difference between Brownfield and Greenfield. It's more about applying those principles. Last word, maybe, when people think Greenfield is easier, you cannot believe how quickly Greenfield becomes brown. Mm-hmm. How quickly a new launch and the platform or a product or whatever you do becomes already legacy. So everyone has brownfield elements, even the new startups, even the hyperscalers, even Google, everyone has brownfield. So we anyways need to have that cycle of continuous improvement. So that applies again to everyone.
Understood. It's interesting that you are addressing Reliance Jio as Greenfield, because at the start of my career, I obviously had the good fortune to work with Reliance as one of my clients. And obviously it was the Infocom era with the other brother, right? So what I was very intrigued when you say Greenfield, because I did believe that although Jio was running on VoLTE, it did inherit a lot of at least the backbone was owned by Reliance themselves?
No, there was, so far I know, and again, there may be elements, of course, there was really a new start.
Okay.
Reliance Jio was fundamentally a complete new start. One thing, however, is a common thread. We had a lot of people who have seen other telecommunication players, for example. Also, we had very, very good talent and leaders from some of the earlier days, exactly, which also presents sometimes an issue, again, to the Brownfield versus Greenfield, because bringing in experienced people is, of course, very beneficial.
Of course, yeah.
On the other side, sometimes we need to unlearn.
Agreed.
And we need to then take risks and question some of the things, how we have done it in the past. So it's a balance.
Sure.
But fundamentally, Reliance Jio has been a new start.
Understood. So if you're saying from a business principle perspective, from a strategy perspective, it's a complete restart in terms of, although there might be certain bits of legacy of tech here and there. Understood. So let's understand and break this further down, and then we'll get into the supply side of the chain. We were talking demand side right now. Before I move into the supply side, which is vendors like ourselves, partners like ourselves, I want to understand the convergence that's happening between the CIO and the CTO organization, because fundamentally, the network is now completely software defined. It's becoming a piece of code. At the end of the day, you spoke of SD-WAN. We are speaking of 5G monetization. It's an API-driven economy at the end of the day. What it takes for the network, what it takes for IT, it's completely software-led, right? And I'm sure you have been at heart of this change in Telia as well, where part of the network was pretty much virtualized and you disaggregated. So do you see the disaggregation to be the future with the 5G standalone moving forward across? We have some success stories with Verizon in the US, AT&T, with Microsoft Nexus for Azure. I think Telia is using Tanzu, VMware Tanzu.
Yes.
for.
Yes.
So do you really feel that that's the ideal strategy for a CTO to adopt in order to,
It's not easy. Let me say that, yes, because fundamentally you could argue it's all software.
Okay. Yeah.
So why do make a difference?
Right.
Right. Why should there a network department and there's an IT department, there's a network and there's an IT head, and why is there different things going on? So fundamentally, of course, that is right. Practically speaking, there are, of course, differences. That don't mean that these differences cause any organization or otherwise necessary decisions, but there are differences in the kind of the workloads that we are talking about. Because on the network side, it's all about, latency, it's about reliability, it's about the scalability, it's about all these attributes which require some, I would call it SLA, which is different from the classical IT domain, where I'm not necessarily having that high requirements on my on these KPIs. Therefore, while it's all software and while it's all, in the end of the day, of course, being containerized and the DevOps practices and the APIs, everything will apply to both of the domains, we need to be a bit careful not to jump the gun. And I think there has been, and if you talk to some of you will know this for sure as well, if you talk to some of the people that have been in the early days, whether it's on the VMware side, on some of the other platforms, it has been quite hard learnings to bring in network workloads on a fully containerized environment. So it's probably to an extent that some of the industry has jumped too early and gotten really burned, and therefore it's being even slower than it could have been in a more planned approach.
Right.
So in the end of the day, clearly it's all software. Clearly the software principles, whether it's from a development or from an operations perspective, will apply. But practically speaking, we need to just be careful that the workloads that we are talking about are different, and therefore there requires to be certain specific know-how and certain specific technologies and attention on the domains for the time being. But yes, it will definitely converge. And we see some of the telcos, they have a CTIO.
Correct.
Telia has a CTIO now. I mean, I was running both. Some of them are still separate, but then you have maybe a combined infrastructure head which runs the IT and the network infrastructure. So it will, in the end of the day, converge to a technology function. But we need to be mindful that there are different requirements for the different workloads in the two domains.
Absolutely, and I believe that fundamentally, the Ericssons and the Nokias of the world, who have been running networks for so many years, right? It's not easy to suddenly adapt to their ways of working with a piece of code plugged in, and the workloads that typically the hardware handles is in a different magnitude, and I believe the reason why I asked is because a lot of people talk about cloud and cloudification in other industries from an IT estate standpoint. In telco world, people are perceiving network to be the cloud of the future, and that's where the disaggregation comes into play, because this year most OEMs, if I may use that word, whether it's Huawei, Nokia, Ericsson, they are perceiving network to be the cloud of the future, where everything would be virtualized, and that's the converged cloud. There's no distinction between an IT cloud per se or a network cloud per se. It's like the cloud of the future. So I'm hoping that when you break 5G into different components and compartmentalize into, let's say, ultra reliable low latency use cases or massive IoT use cases, this convergence of network, or the network cloud will basically empower and enable those and industrialize those at scale, right?
Yeah.
So,
no, that's true. I mean, that Nokia talks about programmable networks, and so that is clearly looking forward where we are heading to.
Right.
We want to have the kind of information and the signaling, so the network content flowing through our networks, so that we don't have to manage the network manually. It has to be, in the end of the day, the self-configured, self-healing resiliency in the network without having to do any kind of a configuration by any human anyways. And here again, there comes the AI significantly into play, because that requires, of course, a huge set of capabilities which you would not be able to do by a human. You should not be able to do by a human. Are we there today? No, unfortunately, we still we have to employ a lot of people to handle different configurations, to handle different routings, to do whatever, which then of course also is oftentimes a cause for mistakes and outages. And so therefore, the more we can automate, this is also the journey that we have taken in Telia most recently, the more we automate, the better it will be as a quality as well. And then our people can focus on setting the direction and governing, and also handling the hopefully rare exceptions, but the main workloads can be done by the machines rather than by the people.
Understood. Let's zoom into some of the typical challenges that at least I witness as a supplier to my clients and customers across the globe. One of the fundamental disconnects, if I may use that word, I've observed in most telcos is, if I break the CIO organization and if I break the enterprise architecture landscape into three distinct layers. I look at process layer, I look at the application layer, and then I look at the data layer, right? So if I look at these three distinct layers, there is often a lack of synergy, if I may use that word, between how a process and the rule engine within the process behaves versus what applications are delivering versus, of course, you have certain out-of-the-box features which are catering to those processes. But fundamentally, we talk of AI, but we really don't fix the data layer, because I think the data layer is all over the place. There's a huge trust issue in terms of understanding data quality, data integrity. And I believe the fundamental disconnect with data not delivering what it is supposed to deliver is because of this disconnect. For example, you talk of auto fallouts, you talk of billing related reconciliation errors, you talk of network alarm correlation issues, right? So of course, this is another network example that I've taken. It's largely because of the lack of synergy between the core processes that are running there versus the underlying data. Do you think that, thinking a converged approach where bringing process and data together, synergizing them into maybe a single pane of glass will help the CXO? Of course, there's no tool in the market which can do that. You have multiple tools creating a platform. Just a thought here.
So what we have very much focused on at Reliance Jio, going back to that case example, very much we looked at a process-led way of working. And process-led way of working was to the extent that we looked at basically, if you look at the enterprise landscape, you could argue there's four main domains. There's the customer domain, the product domain, technology domain, and then maybe the enterprise domain with HR and finance and so on processes. And so if I double click on the customer domain, for example, I would then have, awareness to lead to order to activate, usage to bill to cash, trouble to resolve, and maybe request to terminate. So whichever way you want to do it. And what we wanted to do, and we have done, and I think this is the right way, at least a right way, to make sure that we have an ownership for the processes. We need to have an ownership for the processes.
You mean accountability?
And accountability by name. And then, of course, there are associated systems, there's associated data with the process, but I need to have this accountability in place. So, for example, you called out order fallouts.
Yeah.
What is the issue, the underlying issue with the order fallouts? Many times at least, it's a bad order entry.
Correct.
If I have a custom acquisition and there's a free field where I can enter some random stuff, maybe an address which doesn't even match the standard address, later when the order is processed, there will be an issue. Maybe I can't fulfill. Maybe I can't send the router to the customer, and then I already will have a fallout. So the importance is that when I have this accountability, the person that owns the acquisition process in this particular case will have to make sure that the order entry makes sense. Ideally, I do the order entry through a digital like Aadhaar in India we have done, so there's no entry even anymore. So that is the point. We need to have accountabilities clear. Mm-hmm. And then we can drive any improvement from bad data quality, and we can drive the improvement from making sure the quality is first time right from there. I would start always from a process-led way of working.
So that's the top-down approach that you're suggesting rather than a bottom-up approach, right? Yeah. Great. Let me come to the speciality of the vendor landscape now, because I think that's where people would be more intrigued. So I'm sure you have dealt with a number of IT network vendors, consulting vendors, so to speak. A lot of people do look into, the telco world as, not much happening nowadays, stagnating, so and so, etc. In your mind, what was the simplistic approach that, not just like us, but companies who are into consulting and system integration or into, let's say, services sector should focus on? Maybe the top 3 CIO priorities and the top 3 CTO priorities. Mm.
So maybe let me say 2 things to this. One is going back to my 5 Ps. One of the 5 Ps is partners. So I consider, in at least where I'm working, the people that we work with as partners, not as vendors. Right. And that is a big difference, because a partner is someone that I can also have a strategic discussion with. Okay. A partner is someone that maybe takes the liberty to challenge me. A partner is someone that goes with me through good times and bad times. Right? It's a very different thing than just having a vendor who has a contract to fulfill. So I think that's one important thing, and that leads also to the fact that there is a joint incentive to get things done, and a joint incentive, for example, to innovate, a joint incentive to also invest into certain things. And so the best things that I've seen coming out of partnerships is exactly when there is a partnership on a personal level, where there's a joint incentive and a joint understanding of what to do in the future. So I think that's easier again said than done, because normally there's a contract, I do a contract, and then I have a certain set of milestones and functions and features to fulfill, and then it is so that's I think quite important when it comes to the priorities that we should see as partners. I think they're very simple. The priorities, if I summarize them: get the cost down, get the revenue up. Full stop. So this is the what. In my words, this is the what. Get the cost down and get the revenue up, because if I do these things, I will have a better cash flow, I will have a better valuation, and my shareholders and my, everyone is more happy. In order to do that, that's obviously a lot to do. There's simplification, standardization, scaling across the 5 Ps. There's the customer experience improvement to come with that. There's a lot of things that need to be done, where again partners should help where it's needed. But at the end of the day, the priorities are super simple: get the cost down, get the revenue.
And this applies to both CIOs and CTOs in terms of. Now, the reason why I asked you is, I think when you talk about partners, I also feel that in your definition of a true partner who's willing to take that risk along with you when it comes to fail fast principles or willing to invest in an MVP-led kind of a product culture, or maybe a concept culture, if I may say so. So when you talk of innovation, it has to be a joint-led innovation where equal stakeholders are pretty much in play.
A good example, I just advertise a little bit. I mean, a good example of a partnership is Telia and Ericsson.
Right.
If you just look at those two entities, we have been so much focusing on this partnership since at least I started in 2020, leading up to a joint innovation, 5G innovation partnership that is, I think, second to none in the world, where we create a 5G innovation testbed where on top the customers and research institutions can actually deploy applications running on the most state-of-the-art 5G environment everywhere you can find. Right. So this is a partnership that really, I think, has shown how a joint incentive and a joint personal engagement up to where the CEO has helped to create something really unique.
Really unique. Understood. Now, and that works perhaps with let's say an innovation or a product-led mindset. What if I flip it to a services-led mindset? Of course, the principles remain the same, but where do you see as the hotspots for? Like I see a lot of traction now on this whole revamping of when 4G came into play, it was all about the customer. When 5G came into play, it's all about automation and orchestration, right? So the whole landscape of really looking at the OSS, BSS in a completely different paradigm, making it more catalog driven, right? And not essentially catalog driven means you're only looking at BSS. You're basically looking through and through right till the network provisioning chain, where actual catalog driven principles are right down at the last mile, where your service management and orchestration is also following catalog driven principles. Do you foresee that as perhaps one of the...
Yeah, not only foresee, it's live. So again, a little bit proud. That's why I'm taking the liberty to talk about it. We have done this at Telia.
Right.
So we have implemented, and in this case, again, it happens to be Ericsson as our partner, a fully catalog-driven architecture for the entire B2B business here in Sweden, whereby the product elements are in the catalog. I can, as a product manager, configure a new proposition directly online. It is then, when the customer orders, it's visible, of course, on the website, and automatically, when the customer orders, automatically provisioned. And it is also visible to the customer care.
Any B2B product.
Not any, that's the point. There's unfortunately a lot of legacy. We didn't talk about legacy so far. I hope, let's see if we come to that. Normally that's one of the big discussions, but no, legacy products are not there. Yeah. The new products, and of course there's a migration going on, which by itself is a big discussion. But again, to the point of forward looking, we need to have a future.
Correct.
So the new world, and as you were exactly alluding to that, the new world is that we have a catalog-driven automated setup whereby I can configure my proposition out of the product elements in the product catalog. Customer can buy, it's provisioned, he can use, he can pay, and also he can get service when there is a need. So this is the future, completely automated through without having any human in the loop in this whole chain.
Great. And when it comes to AI, now you obviously we spoke a lot on different things, and I know it's a difficult thing to cover all aspects or all facets of telcos. There's so much of complexity involved as well. When you talk of AI, I mean a lot of companies I've seen, they're doing a lot of stuff in the AI, but I do believe that it's also for the sake of doing AI or being relevant as part of the AI wave. Personally, I believe that we should speak of AI in an organic fashion. So we should look at automation, then analytics, and then AI. I mean, at Virtusa, we have this whole principle of AAA, which I call as automation analytics AI. It's an organic upliftment. It's not a random sporadic thought, behind it. One of the reasons that we are thinking like this in telco especially is, you mentioned issues on data quality and integrity, right? So what's the point in actually deploying a bunch of AI use cases when your data itself is faulty, which means the results of that predictive model will equally be faulty, right? So do you think that is perhaps one of the better ways of thinking and demystifying the most impacting low-hanging fruits of AI? Yeah. If we look at perhaps automation first and then analytics and then AI?
Yeah, so to the first statement that you made, I do agree. Like almost in any new technology, there was a hype cycle which has overhyped the technology, and then probably there's this trough of disillusioning, and then later we will see a much more realistic picture. Like greenwashing, you could call it AI washing sometimes, where there's you can't have an analyst call without mentioning AI many times. That has hurt, I think, again, because the reality is AI by itself is only an enabler, right? It's only an enabler that I can use in order to improve any of my value propositions. Value proposition can be improving the customer care. Value proposition can be automating my network. Value proposition can be I'm just getting better monitoring and fault prevention and prediction, right? So, or even things like what we have done, automatic RFI and RFQ responses that are generated by a large language model who knows all my product catalog to the point of catalog, who knows all the previous RFQ responses that I've given. So these kind of things, extremely helpful, and they are very valuable. So AI has to be infused across the entire organization, but where it makes sense.
Correct.
Now, in your three A's,
right.
I would actually say the first one needs to be a D.
Right.
And the D would stand for digitization. Because if I don't have a digitization, I cannot do anything in terms of analytics. It sounds trivial, but unfortunately, in a brownfield environment, you will believe, of course, because you know it, so much things are still manual.
Absolutely.
So much things are broken between the different flows without having an API. So many things are, still happening outside of system and between unconnected systems, and that has to change. So the first thing is that we need to digitize end-to-end our processes, the ones that I just talked about. So the customer process, product development, product operation and technology, and also the enterprise processes. Once I have done this, then I can go further. Then I can automate. I agree with that, because then I can stitch them together. This can be classical RPA type of automation, or more smarter, like we have done in Telia with ServiceNow. And you can plug in but then the point is this digitized and automated environment allows then to smartify.
Correct.
Where I put the AI, potentially even the large language model-based AI on top. Right? So this is the sequence of events, how again, our transformation we have driven. And that I think is a good organic way of unlocking the power of AI throughout the organization.
No, I mean, the reason why I said this was purely to take a more pragmatic approach rather than a sporadic approach, right? So I believe that if we are random and sporadic and just do AI for the sake of AI, it doesn't yield any business or operational value. In order to be more meaningful to the business, more meaningful to the operations, it has to be organic rather than inorganic.
Yeah, and there's another big discussion for organizations is how much do I invest into my own capabilities versus how much do I invest into third-party platforms. So I think that's another big, and there's again no easy way in saying right or wrong, but I would argue AI will become center of my operation, so I have to invest into my own capabilities.
Right.
And I should always look for a platform-based approach rather than a bespoke point solution approach. That's my view. It may take a bit longer. It may also be initially a bit more expensive, but it will pay off in the long run. But again, I mean, there is a place for point solutions. There's a place for, of course, buying something just for the specific use case, but just be aware those things, unfortunately, do not really scale, and there will be a missed opportunity because they are typically unconnected.
Correct.
And I want to connect those.
Yeah. So it has to be networked rather than monolithic in nature, right here. I mean, it's mind-boggling the way we have seen the telco transformation. I was imagining yesterday, from the PSTN circuit switch to dial-up phones, to now we are ordering everything through a digital platform, right? It's completely mind-boggling what we have seen, especially in the last decade with 4G and 5G, what has happened in the ICT industry. And I think telco has been the heart of this transformation. So concluding remarks, and then we open it up with the audience, I guess. The future is not that dark. It's not that dull. It's bright. What do you think? I think as a telco practitioner, I always like to believe that the future is bright. We really touched upon a lot of things here. We spoke about organization culture, Greenfield versus Brownfield. We spoke about people, process, tech. We also talked about convergence of networks and IT. I think we covered a lot of hotspots. More importantly, yes, there are challenges. We acknowledge that. But at the end of the day, I would like to believe that CXOs like yourselves and practitioners like us, we need to, really believe in what we do. And I believe that we are going to impact positively to the society and to the greater good. And telcos would still be relevant despite all the headwinds that the industry is facing?
Yeah, I would, like I said, I would go even a step further and say there is so much unlocked value in the industry. Come and join. Come and join. So this industry is the foundation of pretty much all applications that we see today being so value creative. So the underlying infrastructure is hugely important. We have a need to continue to invest into this, but in a very efficient and effective way. And that is what we talk about. So we need to get the infrastructure and the way how we build it, the way how we run it into a more efficient and effective setup. And that's why some of the principles that we discussed are so important. But there is value. And so we need you guys and all the right talent out there to help unlock that value.
With that, I think we come to the end of our chat.